Hello folks, welcome back. I need a project for the next meeting of our Minnesota chapter of the National Association Watch and Clock Collectors Club. This is an annual restoration meeting and I need something to bring. So I have here a Howard number 70. It's a nice clock. I have not opened it up yet. I acquired it a few months ago and it's just been sitting around. The story on this clock was it apparently was painted silver. Ick. So the prior owner had it stripped, but we're going to try to do some casework and see if we can shine this guy up a little bit, and then of course we'll go through the movement. The first thing, and the reason for this very awkward camera shot that I need to do, is actually remake a hanger because the one that's on here is pretty terrible. This is what somebody worked out. It's a little piece of thin metal with a bunch of holes drilled in it. And I might have even used it for a while, except this hole is too small for the heavy screws I use to make sure my clocks don't fall off the wall. I have drawn up this as a little custom hanger, and I've got a piece of steel here, and I'm going to try to make this. Now, I do have some automated machining tools. I'm actually, the clock is sitting on my CNC router at the moment. However, this is steel. The router can cut aluminum and can cut brass, but steel, So we're gonna kind of do a little hybrid of using some automated design, but then I'm gonna just kind of grind this out. So stand by, I've got an idea. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Minnesota Clocks and Watches CO2 laser. Why do something the easy way when you can make it really convoluted and hard for no particular reason? Anyway, we have our piece of metal, and what I've done here is I have spray painted it with 3 different colors, and I want to try using the laser to mark the part. This laser is a CO2 laser, and it is not powerful enough to cut steel. CO2 lasers can cut steel if you have a lot of oxygen feeding into them. They essentially are a kind of a high precision plasma cutter. Once you get going, the laser makes the heat and the oxygen oxidizes the cutting process, which works very much like a plasma cutter does. But this one is not going to do that. But what I'm hoping it'll do is actually draw our pattern in a visible way through the paint, and then we can machine that with conventional tools. So I'm going to get this queued up. I think maybe we'll try white first here. And I've got the little laser pointer dot there, and I can go over to my control system and draw a picture around. Oops, I need to switch this up a little bit. Draw a picture of where the part's going to go on this to make sure it fits. Yep, it's coming off the bottom. I think that'll work. So we'll give this a try. I have no idea what'll happen. This is just my first crack at this, but seems like maybe it could work, so we'll see. Well, there we go. That turned out pretty darn nice. This is nice high contrast on the white paint. My laser is 130 watt CO2, and this was at about 40% power. Nice sharp lines. I can probably scratch through this, the white paint. I spray painted it earlier today, but that might stand up to some machining. Just for fun, since it doesn't cost us anything, let's try it on some other colors and see what happens. Well, that was pretty fun. So we have our original template and then the life-size laser copy. I did one in black, one in the purple that I had, and then just to prove that this laser is never going to cut steel, I ran it on the bare steel. So I think this is going to be probably good enough for our purposes. If I'm careful, I think this will survive the machining process. They do make marking material that sticks a lot better than this, and what it actually does, and in this case, the laser is actually vaporizing the paint off of the metal and exposing bare metal. The marking spray actually gets catalyzed into the metal, and it's very scratch resistant. So that's something different entirely. This is just regular old enamel spray can. But I think it's kind of fun. We'll see if we can make what we designed. Well, I've got to say, awkward work holding aside, this turned out pretty well. I was having trouble getting my end mill close enough to the arbor with the setup that I had, which is far from ideal. But the paint, which is what I was really curious about, has held up really well to me touching it, a little bit of chip scratching. I'm really pleased. I'm going to use this trick again. So I've just got to drill these holes out a little bit bigger, and then we can mount it on the clock, and I can actually show you what we're working with for the project that we're actually trying to do here. The new hanger is doing its job. Now we can get the clock up and see it a little better. Someone stripped this and didn't do a terrible job. I'm not really sure what's on this wood, if there's any residue of either the stripper or the finish. I'll do some experimenting to figure out what we need to do with that. The dial is in fairly good shape, certainly not bad enough for me to try to do anything with. Down below, we've got our weight board and pendulum. These normally have a little mounting device here to lock the pendulum in place, and that's missing on this clock. And the clock came with a couple pieces of another board. Looks like there's a third piece that is not here. Not sure if I'm going to be able to do anything about that or not. The weight is intact inside. I've got a repair date of 1/19/1925, I think there. Nice obnoxious pencil right in the middle of the clock when you open the door. So let's get it apart, and we'll see what our next step is to get the finish spruced up. The doors are off, and now we can check out the inside. Look at these great repair marks. We've got cleaned 2/18/1902, August 15th, 03. I don't know if that's, I presume that's 1903. Hard to tell sometimes. Got all kinds of interesting marks here. Movement looks to be pretty clean. I may not have to do anything other than disassemble, oil, and put it back together. Pendulum bob is very nice. It's got the engine turn pattern there. And it's a little bit out of beat, so the clock is hanging slightly crooked, but it's running. So I think this may be largely a case project. There's some tarnish on brass parts, and still don't entirely know what was done with this clock, so that's going to be the bulk of the work, is trying to reverse engineer this and get the wood cleaned up. I've talked a number of times on this channel about the difference between conservation, preservation, restoration, etc., and there are different goals that you can have in all of those things. I am not a museum. I am not a purist necessarily, and this clock already has lived a life of being painted silver. So we're not going to go hardcore into the preservation, conservation side. I'm going to try to make this clock look nice. I've got the clock disassembled, and we are looking at, there's the dial. So here is the weight and pendulum door. I believe this is probably as close to our best picture of the original finish on the clock as we have. So within the constraints that we have to work on, this is what I'm going to shoot for to make it look as close to this as I can. Here we can see some of the silver paint abomination. That it feels like spray paint, but I don't think they did that because I don't know how they would have kept it from getting everywhere, but ick. So we're going to have to fix that. For the rest of the clock, we need to figure out what this finish is. And so polyurethane is not going to be what it was because that wasn't invented until long after this clock was made. So the realistic choices are probably lacquer or shellac. And the easiest way to test that is to use some alcohol, which I have on this paper towel. And I'm going to just rub a little bit, and we'll see what happens. If the alcohol dissolves the finish, which we can see it is doing here, where our rag is a little bit yellow, this indicates that it is shellac. Shellac dissolves in alcohol. It's actually how you apply it. So I think this is a good sign. You can get into trouble if you mix finish types, and so we're going to continue using shellac as we put this clock back together now that we know what it is. So I'm going to spend some time just going over the clock, trying to get rid of some of the gunk that's here, seeing what I can do about this paint. These little nails are actually important. These are dial alignment pins. The dial has these little chunks cut out of it that set on those pins. So I may do a little bit of sanding to try to deal with the paint, but I'm going to be careful not to disturb these dial mount pins. I've done a little bit more cleaning on this, and I just wasn't happy with how it was coming out. There's still gunk in the grain, so I've decided I need to strip it again. You can still see some remnants of the disastrous paint job, dark marks on the bezel here. So I'm going to put a coat of the citrus strip on to try to get the rest of the paint and lacquer out. Again, if you're looking for conservation, this is not what you typically do to a clock like this, but since this started off so gross with paint, I think a good strip will be good for the long run, even if we do sacrifice some originality to the finish. This is nice and gooped up. We'll let it sit for a couple hours and see what comes out. 12 hours have passed, and we can see that some of the stripper has dried a little bit. The crusty stuff indicates that. I have taken the door frame here and I have used stripper wash to get off the first layer of the stripper, and I think we might need to go around one more time on this. I'm still seeing some residue, and this is fairly typical in this, at least for my experience. I don't claim to be an expert in refinishing. So I'm going to, I think, just touch up the coat on the rest of the clock that I haven't investigated yet, re-thicken it and give it a little bit more time and see if we can maybe get a little farther on the rest of the pieces. I do think we're making progress, but this is a little bit of a painstaking process, and I'm going to try to do it right. I have stripped and washed, I think, to about the level of effort that's justified for this clock. I think things came out pretty well. It's amazing how much that paint was still around, even though the wood looked brown. This isn't perfect, but I think we're 97% of the way there. I did a little patch of a gouge here. I'm hoping that hides a little better under the finish. It's hard to match that exactly. But I think we are ready to give it a spray. This is the product I'm going to be using. This comes in a regular brush style finish, and then we have the can. It also comes in two different colors. This is clear, and there's an amber color. I've done another clock in amber, and that looks pretty orange. So I think this is going to be our best bet for an oak kind of color. As with any finish, taking lighter coats is better than soaking it in. One difference of shellac compared to other finishes is shellac actually dissolves the prior coat underneath it. A modern finish like polyurethane actually just layers on top. So I'm going to just give this a quick little spray. It dries very quickly, and we can see how this progresses. I'll do some sanding between coats. We'll let that dry for a little bit. I'm about 1.5 coats into this now, and I am pretty pleased with how it's coming out. I've done a little bit of sanding in between, some 400 grit paper, and we'll see how this comes out in the end to see if I do anything to knock the shine down a little bit. But so far, it looks really good. Looks like an oak finished clock should. The other thing I'm really pleased about is my repair on the bezel of the clock here. It takes me quite a while to actually find it. It's right there. And so I'm really pleased at how well that's hiding. The finish really brought that into match the color of the rest of the wood. I've done 6 or 8 coats with the spray can, and it looks pretty nice. This is oak, so that's a fairly open-grained wood. It's not going to be a smooth finish without using grain filler, as some woods like maple or walnut would be. But I think that's okay because that's how this clock was originally. The only thing I'm not happy with is right here on these little wings. I must not have quite done enough stripping that second time through. But I don't think it's going to be too big of a deal in the grand scheme of the clock. So I'm going to accept that as good enough. And there's more to do on this clock, but I think this is a good place to stop for this video. Thanks for watching.